so I'm gonna now just cover like what we're doing today. Um, I know most of you all are using either like our foundations part of our platform or our growth part of our platform with the evaluations part of KickUp. And today we're going to focus on that learning module. So we're going to talk about organized professional learning, registering for events, and how all of that works, and then how it all can tie together. And so I'm actually just going to jump right into KickUp. And we'll go back to my home screen from here. But first, I'm going to take you through the perspective of what it looks like from a teacher's perspective. So a teacher or a staff member logging into KickUp. I know you all are probably familiar with this KickUp home screen. A couple of things I'll point out that have changed now that that PD management side of our platform has been turned on, that learning module. You'll notice that they can now, there's a couple additional buttons here for them to browse for events and also confirm their attendance. And then there's also a section here with some details about all of the learning they're participating in. From a teacher's perspective, the reason I want to start there is one, just to show you that there are a couple main actions that a teacher is going to take in the system. So again, browsing, registering for events, confirming their attendance after they've gone to an event, and then viewing their log. Those are going to be the main things that they're going to be doing in this part of the system. And I just wanted to highlight one, like how easy it is for them to do, but then two, how that's going to then tie back to our event creation on the back end. So a couple things here in this learning section, teachers will be able to see their like recent events they've attended, any upcoming events they have, and if there are recent self-paced courses that they've registered for, those would live here as well. I'm going to start by going into this browse section and just showing you what it looks like to browse for events in KickUp. And what you'll notice here is we do have this search bar up at the top. So if they wanted to search by title for an event, they can do that by just typing in the name of the event. And I'll zoom in a little bit here. They'll also have access to see, to filter events by these, what we call event tags. So these tags are customizable. So these are things that you can, one, create the name that, like, for example, we have content focus here. That's something that you would create on your own, create that category, and then you can add the individual pieces of that category. So the different contents that would live under here, you would be able to manage those pieces. And these are just ways for teachers to, when they come in, they can filter down and see events that really apply to them. So just to help them like declutter that view if there's a lot of events that they could be potentially looking at. You'll also notice when there's this events tab here, and then we also have our self-paced courses. So these events are kind of those events happening at a specific time. And then self-paced courses, they can just toggle over to here, and they can see those events that might be open that they can access at any time. If you do have Canvas, I will show you this a little bit later in the event creation, but we do have the ability to integrate with your Canvas instance. And so they can do some cool things with that integration to simplify the workflow for those folks using Canvas. In this event space, I'll go ahead and just filter down to, let's say I wanted to look at some early childhood events. I can click this here and I'll see any event that is tagged with that content focus. So some of these are just like some general district-wide PD, but I can see here this like early childhood phonemic fundamentals event. I can click the see details, and right from there I can see some additional details about the event. So the time, the date, if there's any like seat limits. In this case, there's 20 seats in this event. I can see how many are open, and then when I want to register, I just click this register button and I'm registered for the event. You'll also notice that this little add to calendar button pops up. And so if I want to add the details of this event to my calendar, so if I use a Google Calendar, I can click this add to calendar button and I can actually add the event to my Google Calendar. Or if it's like if I use like Windows or Mac, Microsoft, I could just download the ICS details and add it that way as well. Any questions about anything? I know like looks like there were a couple questions in the chat. And a good question about like enrolling people into events. Yes, you can do that, and we'll cover like how that can be done. As someone who manages events, you can always register people and register entire groups of people at one time. Any questions about any of those pieces? I know that's kind of the most straightforward part of it.
Oh, Anna had another question. Do you use a different LMS than Canvas?
We are mostly in our district, Google is really what we use for our primary system. We have explored some of the others that the states promised were going to be the next great thing, and they were not. So really Google is kind of our big spot.
Okay.
We've dabbled with some Schoology, but that hasn't worked out quite the way that we hoped. So
no, it's a good question. So Canvas was our first experiment with integration to see how that went, because Canvas has what's called, technically speaking, an open API. So we can kind of like borrow things from their technology side and make connections really easily. So that's why it was a good experiment. But as we hear from other partners that they're using one LMS or another, those are other kind of platforms that we're exploring an integration with. But just because we don't have an integration with Google Classroom doesn't mean that you couldn't link a self-paced course to Google Classroom. So it would basically be, you're housing their registration in KickUp, you're housing their attendance in KickUp, but they would be completing it in Google Classroom or whatever LMS, and you could include a link in the description or in an announcement, which I don't think Rob got to yet, but we have the ability to show announcements and kind of tell people like, here's where you can access this course. And that code could be shared as part of finalizing the course in Google Classroom.
one of the things that I'm thinking through is we develop all of our own compliance courses so that we can do a more short and to the point kind of videos to help make sure that we're meeting all of our regular or required courses. So if I could figure out how to marry that into this, that'd be beautiful.
Yeah. So those, and that's something I think like definitely like Lindsay could like further talk about with you directly, but yes, that's something that you would be able to like house those events in KickUp and use our confirmation code as a way to confirm that people are completing those courses. And speaking of confirmation codes, so just to talk a little bit about the way that we handle attendance confirmation. So after someone's gone to an event, so in this case, I've registered for this event, but let's say it's completed, and now I need to go back and show that I was there. This is one of, I'd say primarily like the biggest differences for folks that move to our learning module, is that we put some of the onus on the staff member to actually like confirm that they were at an event. And they do that using what's called a confirmation code. So if I click this confirm attendance button, I can enter a code that I have. And so this is a 6-digit alphanumeric code that's specific to an individual event. So, but like once an event closes, potentially either a facilitator or maybe it's at the end of a slide deck would like share this code with everyone that's there. And then those folks would then use that code to confirm that they attended the event. So then I'll click confirm attendance. And in this case, this was related to this Teaching Gifted and Talented event. And this is me confirming that I was there. I'm curious, like just to hear some, how you all are currently handling like attendance confirmation. Does anybody want to just share like briefly, like how is that different than how you're currently doing that, the attendance confirmation at the moment?
I can tell you, we're still doing old school, here's the date, here's what it was.
Paper sign-in sheets?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else want to share about how they're like currently collecting that attendance information?
Ours is similar. We create the course, they sign in or we scan their badges, and then we go in and grant the credit versus them having to take that action of doing it, because we discovered that sometimes they don't do those final steps, but then we're the ones that get held accountable when they say, well, I was there. And so we really kind of own that ourselves versus they doing that, unless it's an external event, like they go to our service center or they're doing a college course that we allow them to count for their flex time. In those cases, they have to upload the evidence for those. So I'm interested to hear what that looks like in this module 2.
Yeah, and I think I would just share that we do have this like confirmation code. There are also ways to manage the attendance like as an event facilitator on your own. So you can still like confirm who is there. You can do all of those pieces. So if you don't, if there are some concerns about people being consistent and going back and handling that on your own, there is a way for that to be managed in KickUp by the facilitator or an admin. And before I jump into like some other parts of the platform, you'll also see that like once you can confirm your attendance, you are asked to provide your feedback. And I'll just open up, this is like our sample feedback form. If you're familiar with any of like our form builders in KickUp, this will look pretty familiar. But again, this is a form that you can customize. And then, for example, there's some questions here about their experience. They would then be answering these on these different scales here, providing some open responses, and just thinking about like when you think about it and being familiar with KickUp, these questions relate on this, like these matrix style questions on these scales would then translate into our heat maps. And as we talked about, we'll get further into again like tags and those filters. But when you think about like collecting that PD feedback data, those tags that we're creating and tagging events with, that's a way to then like break that PD feedback data down. So disaggregating the data using some of these tags on the back end. And the hope is this like simplifies a lot of that data collection process as they're confirming their attendance and then going in and providing feedback. I think it's also worth pointing out, they'll also be emailed a reminder to provide that feedback as like the feedback is valuable to us, and just talking about like other email notifications they get when they register for an event, they'd get an email confirming the registration. And then they'd also get a reminder email the day before, just reminding them that the event's happening. As we move through, because I do also want to spend some time in, I do want to get to like the event creation piece. Anna, you talked about like those out of district events that people would be tracking. I'm not going to get into like all the details because a lot of this is can be like specific to how you handle that as a district. But essentially in this log space, you'll see that you can, like as an individual staff member, you can submit an event request. So this would be a way for you to submit some of those details about an event that you're attending that's outside of your district. There are some approval workflows tied to that then could be approved, and that can be added to what we call your log. And so here at the bottom, you'll see this individual person's attendance log. These are all the events that they've registered for. And if they've confirmed their attendance at those events, they'll actually have the ability to download a certificate. And that certificate can have your like district logo. You can add a signature to it if you'd like to. And they can see like a list of all the credits that they've received, any hours, all their PD hours would live here. And then they can also print a transcript. And you can see this is the transcript. The logo is a little big on our Willow Creek school district, but you can see like the transcript where you can see the number of hours, how many credits I've earned. So you'd be able to access all of that as an individual at any time. So again, I don't want to spend like a ton of time here on this like teacher perspective, but the concepts, like what I've shown you so far, is really just they're browsing, registering for events, they're confirming their attendance, providing feedback, and then viewing their log. Those are going to be the main actions that they're doing in the system. Does anybody have any questions about like anything I've shown related to that before we move into the event creation?
I just had a real quick question. Do you often when they're browsing events, do people tend to put both district PD as well as like conferences that are like pre-approved, or how does that work?
So, and when you say like pre-approved conferences, are you referencing like maybe a conference that's outside of like what your district hosts, but that is pre-approved that folks could have access to?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how that's differentiated, where, you know, there's obviously PD we offer in district, and then we also send people out to conferences. So do they live in the same space, or how does that work?
Yeah, so they would live in the same space, and you could just, when you're creating an event, you would just like put in some details about maybe if they need to do some additional registration, like accessing the website for that other event. But they would live in the same space so they could see them all together.
And sorry, one last follow-up on that. So if right now, like a teacher might say, I want to go to this conference, and they complete forms for the PDC committee. Do people do that often too, where teachers submit a request to go to something they found through the system?
Yeah, so that would that like last piece when they're it's called like the out of district request. They would
Gotcha.
fill those out and they could submit a request to go to an event outside of their district.
Thanks.
All right, so we've covered things from a staff perspective. I'm now viewing this as an event creator. And so the main thing I'll point out here is you'll notice now, like on my home screen, I have this create event button. So similar to how if you're used to permissions in KickUp, we can give folks global permissions to create events. So once you give them that access in the directory, they would then have this ability to go ahead and create an event. So I'm going to move through this as it loads. But the first thing you'll see here is the ability to, like, you'd add your name for this specific event. In this case, not too creative, but we'll call it math professional development. And this will and then you can add a description here. I think an important thing I want to point out here at the top is the ability that you can toggle back and forth between events and self-paced courses. So this is like our event card. You can see some of the details about, you can see a lot of the details are actually going to be the same between the two, but you can toggle back and forth between what type of event you're creating. If you do go with that self-paced course, or you do have that Canvas integration, again, like you would be able to then like select those Canvas courses and link those directly here, which can help simplify those like workflows where teachers are just looking for their courses like all in one place. But we'll stick with just like a standalone event. The one thing to point out in this description box, obviously this would just be a place where you're sharing details about the event, but you also do have the ability to like hyperlink. So if there's some pre-reading that needs to be done, obviously it wouldn't be a google.com, but you get the concept. You're going to be able to like attach, like if there's like a Google Doc or a site they need to go to, that can be shared here in this description. And as we move through, there's a facilitator field here. So I will go through, and essentially what it looks for is it's going to look through your directory, and you can then select the individual that's facilitating the event. And what this does is, one, it gives the facilitator some permissions to manage the attendance on the event. So I mentioned they're like global permissions. So maybe this facilitator isn't someone that's ever going to be creating events, but you do want them to be able to manage the attendance on the events that they're facilitating. And that would all be driven here by this tab. And then you also, when any like PD feedback data is collected, it'll be tied back to this facilitator. So that simplifies some of those workflows related to PD feedback, where it will live here in this, it will be based on the facilitator name. I'm just gonna, I won't go through the date and time piece, but those pieces are straightforward, just selecting a date, a time for the event. You can enter in here a location. So a common one I use, central office. You can enter a location. I'm not going to be covering like collections during today's conversation, but this is a way for us to group events together that are similar. So if you have maybe like a big district PD day, that's something you would put into a collection. And some of the benefits are it simplifies some of the registration processes for staff. And then also when you look at your PD feedback data or your attendance data, you can actually look at data by collections. So that could be something that's useful for those big PD days, or if you have like a series of events that are related. So maybe you have a PLC that meets monthly, you can put them into a collection. People can actually register for the entire collection in one click. So they're not missing some of those other events. we'll move into tags, and then I'll take a brief pause here to let Kendra just talk a little bit about some of the benefits of the tagging and how it can align to like maybe your walkthrough or evaluation data. But you'll see these are the same those same filters that I was looking at when I was from the teacher's perspective. Again, these are customizable, so this is a list you'd be creating on your own. You'll see in this case, this district uses the Danielson framework as a framework alignment, but you would be able to tag, for example, I know this is like a math professional development. I'm going to select math here. I could also select a framework that this relates back to simplify that filtering process. And then also when I look back at PD feedback data, you can break the data out by tags. But Kendra, did you just want to talk a little bit about tags and some cool ways that aligns to other data in KickUp?
Yeah, absolutely. So to speak a little bit to Anna's question, I know you're in Texas as well. I work with a handful of our Texas districts who are using both our evaluation side of the platform and then also using this PD system. And something that they really wanted to be able to do was turn to their teachers and say, I know that these are the goals that you set. I want to make it super easy for you to sign up for PD that's directly aligned to those goals. So tagging is a really helpful way to really empower your teachers to be able to select professional learning that aligns to the goals you've set. Or if you're noticing as you're doing observations throughout the year, being able to tell your teacher, look for PD that's focused on this T-test standard, for example, or if you use a different framework, just being able to identify these are sort of the various pieces for you to look into. So you can imagine where it says framework alignment and has all of those different options. If you are working in T-test, you can align it to each of the T-test dimensions or more generally to domains. And then as your teachers are browsing for professional learning, in the places where they have choice, if you're having a big PD day, you can imagine they're going through and they're just checking off those various pieces that are specifically aligned to those goals that they set in the evaluation cycle. Does that answer your question, or is there any follow-up you have?
That does answer a big piece of it. So to make sure I understood that last little part that you just said, so you can do breakout sessions in it? So like I could enroll in this conference and choose breakout sessions where Lindsay, I wouldn't have to continue using a different platform?
Yeah, so you can imagine that collections feature is super helpful because you could say, you know, within this collection, we have a bunch of different options and there's a couple features. I'm not sure if Rob will show you in just a moment, but there's a lot of choice within the collection of how you set it up. And you can have folks select like only one thing from the collection, multiple things from the collection. There's a lot of choice in how you set it up. But the really nice thing about this system is that when you're going through and you're browsing, you could sign up for just the sessions that are going to be most relevant to you and your role.
And can that be like, you have to choose one from this 8 to 10 window, one from this 10 to 12 window? You can configure it down to that way?
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't want to steal too much of Rob's thunder here, but.
Okay.
No, yeah, so we can talk. I do have like a sample conference style collection we can jump into and take a look at once we get through some of this these like event creation pieces. But I am curious if anyone else has any thoughts about like how you could imagine like aligning your PD and like the framework you use like in this space using these tags. Like, does anybody else have any thoughts or questions about that? And that's cool. I'll just keep it moving. And so Kendra, thanks for sharing that. And so as we move through some of the other like cool features, we do have the ability to set registration windows. So maybe like when an event, if you want to limit when an event opens and when it closes, you can do that. If you remembered when I looked at from a teacher's perspective, some of that you could see their credits there. You do have the ability to add credits in this space. Those credits are customizable. So similar to your tags, like you have the ability to manage what those credits are. We even have the ability to set credit limits there as well. So you can just kind of type in how many credits this event is going to award. And then I'll focus on this like seat limit feature. So if we wanted to set a seat limit on this event, we can set a seat limit of 25. What that means is once 25 people have registered for this event, that registration button is no longer going to show there. It's going to actually say join this wait list. And then when you click that wait list button, you'll be added to the wait list. You'll get an email letting you know you're on the wait list. And if at any point, either the event creator increases this to 26 people and the system will pull you right off of that wait list and register you, sending an email letting you know you've been registered. Or if someone unregisters from the event, you get pulled off of the wait list. And that wait list is organized by who like click that join waitlist button first. This is where you would designate like the feedback form. So again, you're going to use this feedback form and that you're going to build in the system. And then this would be how that's like turned on here. And then the last thing I want to briefly touch on is visibility and permissions. So currently this event is set to be visible to all users. If you wanted to limit that visibility, so let's say, again, this is a math event. I only want my math group to be able to see this PD. I can then go ahead and actually set this so that only those math teachers are going to see this event, making it a little bit easier for folks when they go in. They're not seeing things that, again, like don't apply to them. You can also, in this space, set permissions on the event. Again, like permissions are handled in the directory like globally, but you can give one-off access to folks to manage a PD. If you wanted to, you can set those permissions in here. I'm going to toggle this back to all users. And the last thing I'll point out is we do have the ability, you'll see I have a submit for review button and a save and publish button. When you click save and publish, this is going to publish directly to that browse section so teachers can see it. We do have the ability for these events to go through a review. So once someone submits it, it would need to be then reviewed by someone at the district level. So maybe if you want to make sure your PD's aligned, things are entered correctly, this would just be one way to kind of gate that. So giving access to a lot of event creators, but then making sure that things are really still meeting the standards of the district. So they would go through the process and then you just be able to approve them so that they're published.
Can I ask a question on the feedback form? Sorry, I've got so many questions.
Oh, it's okay. Great.
But on the feedback form, so, and Lindsay, you'll be familiar with this. So like our content focus session surveys that we do, does the feedback form have the ability to do that in the same depth of what we do with our content focus surveys, like in terms of producing heat maps and being able to help us look at the who, the what, so we could not have to do that separately, it could be connected?
Yeah, in a similar way that we hope to bring your coaching log into KickUp, you would kind of, if it, unless you wanted to make major changes, you could almost seamlessly translate everything that you already connect to KickUp.
I have a quick question about when people are registering for the PD sessions. If it's, say, a district, a mandatory PD, but they have some choice, is there some list, or how do you know like who hasn't selected something so you need to push them into a specific session?
Great question. Sorry, I got a little feedback, but yeah, so now that I've saved this event, I'll actually cover like that attendance piece that'll down at the bottom of the screen. But now that I've created this event, this is what it looks like from an admin's perspective. If you remember, as a teacher, like I could only see that register button. As an admin or this event creator, I have the ability to edit the event. I can go back anytime and change some pieces of it. I also can clone this event. So I mentioned, like, if you have those monthly PLCs, that might be helpful. You created one, you're just going to clone it, change the date, and save yourself some time there. And then this is where that attendance code lives. So if you remember, you need that 6-digit alphanumeric code that's specific to the event that you would share. And this is where that code would live here. I'll move down to first this attendance section. So to speak to the question related to like pushing, like if you know there's some folks that haven't registered yet, I mentioned maybe this is an event related to all of my math teachers. I can again go and like add an entire group. and this will show me a list of who all these people are, and I can add them all in one click. And that will register them for the PD. I can also do that on a one-off instance. If there's a specific teacher I know that needs to register for this event, I can go ahead and add them. Little note, it won't send like an email notification right away, just in case there was like a mistake there. But this would be how you can manage the attendance. So as folks register, this list will fill up, and then you can still add them on your own, either via the group or individual via that search bar. And I know you asked about, you mentioned how currently you all like handle some of those like confirmation pieces. This would be the space where you would just have the ability to go in and you could just confirm that this person was at the event, can be reset, all of that.
Can you grant different percentages of attendance? So maybe it's a two-day event, they only came to one, so you only want to give them 50%, or they had to leave early from an event?
So yeah, so in the case of like editing attendance, and this isn't like a great example, but you for this specific event, but you can edit an individual's attendance. So you can edit the number of hours they receive, how many credits they got. So if they left early, you can change those things there. I also just want to highlight, like, and I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I want to just quickly show, this is our like announcement feature. It's just a quick way to send an announcement to the folks that are registered. So maybe there's something that's changed prior to the event happening. You just want to remind them of a pre-reading, a resource that they need to go through before they attend, or at the end of it, like after an event closes. I see a lot of districts using this as a way to share resources afterwards. So folks ask for that, like, oh, I'd like to see this slide deck. You can use this as a way to share that with them. Even after the event's closed, you can still send some announcements. Because like the part of this conversation was obviously to orient you to parts of this like learning module system, but I also want to talk about how that again aligns to like eval data or walkthrough or coaching data that you're collecting. And so I'm going to take you all into what's called our profile pages. And we're going to look at the profile page for that teacher I was impersonating earlier. And so what you'll see here, the profile pages is a space where we can house all of the data that's related to this individual. So I'm going to see one, like an overview of all the instances in KickUp where this person is on a roster. So if you're familiar with our rosters, you'll see like, okay, this person is part of this teacher evaluation. I can see their coaching instances and their walkthrough instances. I can actually start one from here since I am the person that oversees this individual. And then I can see all of their submissions that have like all the data that's been submitted about them. And that would all live here. And then I can also see their all the learning they participated in. So if I wanted to get an idea of the planned learning opportunities they have coming up, just like how many hours, credits they've earned, I can see that here in one space. And so just envision I'm Abby, and I am a coach for Aaron. And I see the last time, and Kendra sort of touched on this, but I see the last time I conducted a coaching activity with Aaron, we talked about this framework, this 2C framework, and how there's we spent some time covering that. And during that conversation, I mentioned I'd recommend, trying to find some PD that relates back to 2C and managing classroom procedures. And then with that, since I'm using those same framework pieces in my tags, I can go back to that learning tab. Obviously, Aaron could do this on their own and find that like 2C filter, but then I could also filter down to those 2C events, go in, potentially register Aaron for them, and do some of that recommendation. But I won't go through all of that. Essentially, just like, again, I'd use these tags to dive into the framework alignment, find that, and potentially register Aaron directly from there. Or I could just send a link, like copy and paste the details in my browser and send that to Aaron for them to register. I know we're almost up on time. So does anybody have any questions as I talk about some next steps? I have a little bit of extra time, so if you did want to like stay and ask some additional questions, I'm happy to do that. But does anybody have any questions, like really burning questions that you want to ask? And that's fine if not, like that's part of the reason, some of these like next steps. So one, just like a way for you to explore the system further, my recommendation would be like just reaching out to your CSM, talk to them about like how we can learn more about what the system does. Obviously, this was like a brief overview. We can help connect you with a peer district. We have a lot of districts in Texas and Missouri that are using this part of the platform. So happy to connect you with someone to talk to about it. And then we'll also send a recording of this so that you can see it at another time. But again, I appreciate all of your time. We do have like another tour of our growth module coming up on March, in March on the 3rd. And so you're all invited to that as well.